Okay, so what I want to do before we talk about the actual reading strategy for the SAT is go over the general structure for the passive questions. So the passive questions are different from all of the questions because the passive questions are listed. And I kind of mentioned this about an hour ago. They're mentioned in chronological order of the passage, not by difficulty level. So what that means is that difficulty level of those questions is random. Now the order of the questions that will be on the reading section is the following. The first one's always going to be sentence completions. So just kind of repeating what we did about a half hour ago when we talked about the structure of the test. First one, sentence completions. Do you guys remember what kind of came after sentence completions? There was reading. What kind of reading? Not dual. Shorter ones. So I like to call them paragraph length. The paragraph length passages. And then after that will come a long passage. So sentence completions, paragraph length, long passages. Clearly our focus today will be on the long passages because that's more important. About half the questions are devoted towards long passages. Although critical reading section is not a vocabulary test, and a rich vocabulary will allow you to better comprehend the passage, just so you know. And before we talk about the reading strategy, one thing I wanted to just talk about sentence completion just a little bit, because I am going to give you some work to do on that. So what you want to do for sentence completions is try to cover up the choices. And think of your own word to put in the blank. So for example, well, I'm not really covering it because it's projecting through, but if you were to cover them up, right, and then think of your own word, what would be a good word to put in if you chose your own word to put in the blank? Perfect. I love that word. So generous would be a good word to put in there because you donate large sums of money, right? And to charity. And did it on a regular basis. Okay, now you go through, now do process elimination. Now if you know all the words, you should be set because you can figure out 4 of the words wouldn't fit, 1 would, you pick it, everyone is happy and we move on. What words for sure you know wouldn't work? Which one? Yeah, trustworthy wouldn't work. I mean, even though she could be a trustworthy person, but like, you know, for example, I'm trustworthy, but I don't have money to donate. So, you know, just because you're trustworthy doesn't mean you necessarily have money to donate. What else? Malevolent? Yeah, because that means bad, right? That's a root for evil. So roots are good to look at as well. What else can we get rid of? Vile. Yeah, vile is like a negative word. Because we want something positive here, right? And remember, it has to be a perfect fit. It has to fit perfectly. Like trustworthy, you could twist it, but it wasn't really a perfect fit. So now it's down to B or C. And keep in mind that this was a medium / hard question. So it should be a fairly unfamiliar word. You know, maybe a word that you probably didn't know in middle school, for example. If you had to choose between B or C, what would you go with? B? If you look at C, amiable, look at the root am. Um, if you try to compare words to words in Spanish or Latin, because remember English and Spanish are both based off Latin, what word uses the two letters am? Amor. What does amor mean? Love. Good. So think about amiable or amicable or ameliorate. Those all have positive connotations. Like amicable means friendly. Ameliorate means make better. Amiable also means friendly. You can be friendly, but does that mean you're generous? No. And this is a word that a lot of people have never seen before, but that's okay. It's okay if you've never seen that word, because it should be hard, right? As long as you can use roots, and as long as you know %80 of the words, you'll never miss these questions. And it so happens that of the 80% that you know, one of them is the correct answer, then great. That's good. So that's how I would go about this. And so you have a chance to practice this for homework later tonight. Okay, now let's talk about how to actually read the passages. I'm also going to ask that you, in your blue book, turn to page, give me a sec here. Turn to page 591. In the blue book. So what we're going to do is when we talk about the strategy, we're also going to look at this passage as an example. The first thing that I advise you to not do is don't read the passage twice. I don't want you to read the passage twice. And here's the reason why. What some people do, and I actually was guilty of doing this when I was in high school, is that I would read the whole thing, then go to the questions, and wind up rereading it. Why did I have to reread it? What was that? Right. Yeah, exactly. Because when I read the first time, I didn't really understand what I was reading. Mostly because these passages are very dry and very boring. So it's hard to be really engaged in what they're talking about. So you read it all in one shot, and you try doing the questions, but then the problem is you're not really absorbing it, so you find yourself having to reread it. So instead, the passage should always be read in partner with the questions and not before. So what do I mean by that? As you'll see when we go through all these different items here, I don't want you skimming it, because you do have to read the whole thing. I don't believe in skimming. I don't want you going directly to like line 14 or lines 1 through 24, whatever. Because again, you do need to read stuff that's surrounding those lines as well. But what I want you to do is I want you to take this in small doses, or break it down into parts. So here's what we do. The first thing you want to do is you want to read the italicized portion first. So if you look at the top of page 591, they say this passage is from a book of nature writing published in 1991. So you know it's a nature type of passage. Okay. So at least you kind of know it's obviously going to be non-fiction. So you kind of know what you're getting yourself into before you begin reading. The next thing I want you to do is I want you to read the first paragraph. And the entire first paragraph. But once you finish the first paragraph, which would end at line 24, stop reading. Do not read anymore. You will read a little later, but for now, stop reading. Go to the questions and answer any line reference questions that pertain to material in the first paragraph. So, for example, on page 591, after we read the first paragraph, should we do number 16? Yes or no? Does it have a line reference? No. In fact, the question is asked for the main point of the passage. You don't know the main point after the first paragraph. You have to have read the whole thing before you do number 16. Number 17, is that a line reference? It is. And line 14, is that in the first paragraph? It is. We can do number 17 after reading the first paragraph. Number 18, is that a line reference? Yes. Are those lines in the first paragraph? Yes. So we can do it. Let's go next page, number 19. That's a line reference, but line 26, is that in the first paragraph? Nope. So that's a cue to go back and read again. So now I'll go back, and now I'll read the second paragraph. So what you're doing essentially is that you're only being asked to take in a small piece of information at one time. Not too much at one time. Because it gets too overwhelming to read the whole thing, and then you have to answer questions. Take in small doses. So now you read the second paragraph. Now go to the questions and you repeat the cycle. Now answer any line reference questions that pertain to material in the second paragraph. So after reading the second paragraph, it ends at line 42. We could totally do number 19. Could we do number 20 after reading the second paragraph? On page 592? Yeah, we could do number 20. Can I do 21? No. So now we go back and read again. So in item 4, continue the same process for the rest of the line reference questions in the passage. So that's what you want to do. Is you read a paragraph, answer questions, read a paragraph, answer questions. It's kind of like a back and forth kind of a technique here. Once the entire passage has been read, and all line reference questions have been answered, do not forget to go back to the questions you skipped. And that's what I call the general passage questions, because they deal with the passage as a whole. When they ask about the main point or prime purpose, a tone, or the attitude of the author, whatever. So before we move forward with the rest of some of the other strategies, what I want to do is have you guys read the first paragraph. We'll do 17 and 18 together. So on your own, on page 591, read the italicized portion, read the first paragraph, and then we'll talk about 17 and 18. Okay, so number 17 refers to line 14. Classic most nearly means these are the vocab and context questions, meaning that they're asking what a word means, but not the common definition. Because you think of the word classic, you might think like of something that's like really old or very fancy, perhaps. But it's all about how it's being used in context of the passage, right? So they say first to make the classic incisions shaped like quotation marks. So when they say classic incisions and shaped like quotation marks, it's what we tend to recognize, or what tends to be like, famous. So what choice would you go for number 17? sorry. D, right? So, yeah, D. So you kind of trigger elegant, like fancy, or like reading the classics, like A, literary. B and E are kind of tricky as well, but D makes sense because it's what we know. Like, you think of like vampires, you think of their bite marks being like quotation marks. So, yeah, D would make sense for 17. 18 is asking the discussion of vampire bats in the first paragraph, and they don't mention vampire bats until line 18. So you know the answer is going to be after line 18. So that's another thing to watch out for too when they mention certain words in the question. Where in the passage they start talking about that? They start talking about around. Actually, they do talk about line 9 as well, but that's more about in the movies. But in real life, they start talking about around line 18. So what choice would you go with for that one? For 18? A. Mm-hmm. If you look at B, be careful about B, because they use the word only. Just so you know, choices with the word only are usually incorrect, because that makes for a very bold statement. Like if you were to say like, I only will eat this. Well, that's not true. I'm sure you eat other stuff. Or I only care about this. That's probably not true also, because you probably care about other things. The College Board can get themselves in a lot of trouble when they use those words as a correct answer. So if you see that in a choice, most likely it's incorrect, just so you know. So B wouldn't work. C didn't really talk about that. D, no, that's totally opposite of what they're saying. E, that's not mentioned at all. There has to be evidence to back up your answers. Very, very important. Okay. Let's go back to the binder, and then we'll do more of this reading together. So for strategy 2, elimination and pickiness. So when you go about answering these questions, you want to go in Terminator mode, meaning you want to focus on eliminating all bad answers first. So, you want to go through the choices, and like, for example, for number 18, we knew B didn't make sense, nor does C, D, or E. But it also might help to break them into parts, which I like to call dissect and connect. So like for number 18, it said movies about vampires are based only on North American bats. The word only kind of killed it there. Or C, most tropical bats are not carnivorous. You could focus on tropical bats not being carnivorous. They didn't really say them not being carnivorous, so and they didn't really relate them to tropical bats either. So you want to try breaking up the words. And the right answer has to be perfect. It's got to be perfect, not like, don't twist it, not kind of, sort of. And there's going to be multiple pieces of evidence to back it up. Like, for example, 18 said A. What was your evidence in the passage to make you say A for number 18? Like, what did he mention in the passage that made it seem that the bats were useful? Yes, perfect. That's your evidence. And you backed up the answer. So that's very important for these kind of questions. Okay. So now let's go to page 2.3. We'll fill this out, and then we'll do the rest of this passage. And by the time we should be done for today. So you want to use process of elimination. To help you select the correct answer. And once you're ready to answer the first line reference question that pertains to the passage, we want to use the following process. Before even reading the whole question, try to summarize the information in the lines the question is referring to. So where are they talking about that part of the passage? Like when asked about, the word classic, they're talking about how they made those classic incisions, and shape like quotation marks, and so we want to be able to summarize that information. Then look at choice and try breaking down each choice into pieces if there are multiple words. That's important. And of course, limit choices that contain words or phrases that have nothing to do with the reference material. So, it's got to be backed up by what's being mentioned in the passage. And be picky. Your natural inclination should be to eliminate. That's why it's called critical reading. What does it mean to be critical of something? Yeah. Like, for example, like a movie critic. Why does someone call a movie critic? Because they look at certain parts of the movie that we usually don't see. Like, we see a movie, it's funny, great, but then they might say, oh, the lighting wasn't right, or the acting wasn't quite as good. Like, they get picky. Or a book critic. Like, we read a book, oh, yeah, it's a good book, it's entertaining, but then they'll say, oh, the style, which is really wasn't, so you kind of want to be really picky about that with the reading. Once you settle on one answer, so kind of as a double check, make sure the reference material, so whatever lines you're referring to in the passage, backs up your answer. And usually there'll be 2 to 3 words in the correct answer that agree with the reference material. So it's a bit of paraphrasing too, like just the correct answer will be what you see in the passage, just written in different words. That's how you want to think about it. And if you use the same process for the general passage and the comparison questions, that's when you start doing dual passages. They'll do comparison questions. But now the answer has to be backed up by the whole passage. Okay. So now we're going to do the rest of this passage. And for Jonathan and Tiana, too bad, but you'll just have to figure out on your own. So I'm going to end the video.